Tim Walz's Minnesota has become heaven for those who are wanting to defraud the government. Now, I've got three clips from Minnesota news stations, and I don't know how many of y'all are keeping up with what's going on there, but if you're not keeping up with it, good Lord. They're talking there is probably $1 billion that they're going to find really soon. They've already found over half a billion in just one defrauding scheme. And they found, I think it was 300 million in another one, and that's just two. They have found multiple. There are so many scams that have gone on in Minnesota. It's not even funny. Seriously, if you want to just be in shock at the amount of defraudment that's going on there, you need to check it out. Also, hit like and subscribe because I'm constantly finding government accountability issues all over. And it's Republican and Democrat. So don't think that this is just one party. It's been going on all over the place. So let's get into this.
Howdy, y'all. This is Paul, the Redneck Thinker. What we have here is a channel to communicate. I want you folks to be thinking by the time you leave my videos. Why? Because I'm tired of people talking via what other people tell them to think. So, watch my video and enjoy the chance to think for yourself.
New tonight, we are tracking stolen tax dollars. We've learned the scope of government fraud investigations in Minnesota could exceed $1 billion. And that staggering number comes from acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Joe Thompson. Jay Cole's talked with Thompson, joins us live from the state capitol with a story you are seeing first on 5.
Kevin, lawmakers here at the Capitol spent the last session wrestling with the expanding fraud issue. And today, in a candid interview, the acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Joe Thompson, lays out why he thinks the scope of government fraud will reach historic levels. Feeding Our Future, New Way Alliance, autism centers, and now the federal housing stabilization investigation. All of them significant government fraud cases, some still under investigation, others already prosecuted. I see $500 million in prosecutions just from your office alone. Is that accurate?
I think it is. Yeah, absolutely.
And when his prosecutors finish their investigations, acting U.S. Attorney for Minnesota, Joe Thompson, tells me he expects the scope of fraudulent use of taxpayers' money will exceed $1 billion. To me, that's astounding. How do you describe that?
It's an extraordinary problem and the fraud that's pervasive in this state.
In Minnesota, 1 out of 5 autism centers are currently under investigation. Medicaid claims from 450 providers totaled $220 million last year. And in a current housing stabilization services investigation, the billing reached over $100 million. Thompson says the vast majority of those claims are fraudulent. What, in your opinion, will it take to stop it and get a handle on it?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, that's the question, right? I think the growing awareness of the problem, I think people opening their eyes to the reality of it, and we can't always assume that things are on the up and up, and we have to make sure we're scrutinizing things that look suspicious.
I then asked Thompson if fraud activity is getting better or worse.
There's a little bit of the tip of the iceberg here. Every time we look under a rock, we find more. Fortunately, I think we're starting to devote more and more resources across the state into combating this problem and openly recognizing some of these fraud schemes and stopping them in their tracks.
What I noticed you didn't say there was that things are getting better.
I'm not prepared to say that yet. I'm hopeful.
Now, New Way Alliance admitted no wrongdoing but agreed to pay $18 million in penalties after they were accused of overbilling Medicaid. Now, in the Feeding Our Future scheme, the feds have been able to recover $60 million. The autism centers and housing stabilization investigations, well, those are still underway, and there's no way to know yet the exact number on those investigations. Reporting live at the Capitol, Jay Coles, 5 Eyewitness News.
New tonight, Republican state lawmakers are calling for a federal audit of the state's Medicaid program.
This comes after a week after the FBI raided homes and businesses across the Twin Cities as part of a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation. Fox 9's Mike Manzoni joining us from our newsroom. And so, Mike, you spoke with a man who told you he warned the state about Medicaid fraud years ago.
Kelsey and Randy, we still don't know why the state couldn't stop the suspected abuse, but one fraud consultant says part of the problem here is that states, not just Minnesota, all states end up having to repay the feds when they catch and recover stolen money. And that is because some of that money is federal dollars. The FBI raided more than a half dozen homes and businesses across the metro a week ago today. Investigators say providers took millions of dollars in payouts from Medicaid for helping people find housing. But they say those providers never actually helped anyone. The program shelled out more than $300 million in payments over the last 5 years. The state expected to pay only about $12 million during that time frame. A consultant who warned the state about Medicaid fraud years ago says states have no incentive to find and report it.
So if the folks in St. Paul recover $10 million in Medicaid fraud, the feds say, well, since we put in 70 cents of every dollar, you're going to pay us back 70 cents of every dollar. So the response to that is to do as little as possible.
And I also spoke with State Representative Kristen Robbins, who chairs the Fraud Prevention Committee in the Minnesota House. She says Medicaid fraud has gone unchecked for years, and it's long past time to do something about it, and that is why she's now asking the feds to audit the state's Medicaid program.
Taxpayers are fed up. Citizens who need services are fed up. We need to get our federal partners in here to conduct a full audit, and we need to hold people accountable. That's been the missing piece.
And Robbins pointed out that federal prosecutors estimate government fraud statewide will cost taxpayers more than $1 billion by the time all investigations are over. Experts say states usually get back less than half of what's stolen. In the newsroom tonight, Mike Manzoni, Fox 9.
All right. To be continued. Much more investigation
For years,
to be
probably,
done.
right?
Right. Thanks, Mike. Right now,
we are tracking your tax dollars tonight as outrage continues to grow over a potential $1 billion in fraud. Thanks for joining us this evening at 5. I'm Leah McLean.
I'm Paul Folger, and we start with team coverage. Ryan Race is tracking the dollars and what happens next. But first, Brett Hoffland is diving into congressional demands and taxpayer concerns. Brett.
Yeah, Paul, I reached out to all 4 GOP lawmakers who signed that letter sent to Governor Tim Walz, and no one was available to talk. But there are plenty of people who want to talk about an issue that impacts so many of us.
Just makes me sad, frustrated, and now my big question is how are they going to get all this money back, and where did all the money go?
Now, this is the letter signed by Congressman Tom Emmer and Brad Finstad, Representative Pete Stauber, and Congresswoman Michelle Fischbach. It's asking the Walz administration for answers on how this fraud happened and steps to prevent future issues. It says, quote, as Minnesota is facing a projected $6 billion deficit, this continued pattern of fraud in Minnesota is completely unacceptable, end quote. Now, the latest alleged fraud comes from the Minnesota Department of Human Services Housing Stabilization Services Program. Just last week, federal authorities executed search warrants at 8 offices and homes around the metro connected to the program. DHS says it is focused on rooting out fraud and abuse. And many of the people that we caught up with today just want a better system of checks and balances.
Leadership being accountable for where our tax dollars are going. It's important to expose this, and I'm glad that it is coming to light.
Now, Governor Walz declined an interview with us, but the spokesperson says, quote, the governor has pushed state government to stay one step ahead of the criminals who attempt to take advantage of state services. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out in this case. Now, that spokesperson also says they're exploring the use of AI technology next session to hopefully catch these fraud schemes faster. Live at the Capitol, Brett Hoffland, 5 Eyewitness News.
Brett, thank you. And now we want to break this down for you at home. How much fraud do we know about? What programs are we talking about? and what comes next.
Investigative reporter Ryan Raish is digging into those numbers. And Ryan, what have you learned?
Well, first of all, $1 billion of your tax dollars with a B. That's 9 zeros right there. This is what made headlines this week. The number came from U.S. Attorney for Minnesota Joe Thompson speaking to R.J. Coles. That's how much fraud he thinks we could exceed in Minnesota when all their investigations are done. Now, keep in mind, the U.S. Attorney knows a lot more than what the public knows right now. Here's the rough number we do know: $430 million in fraud prosecuted here in Minnesota in just the last 5 years. 5 Investigates went through every public release from the U.S. Attorney's Office since 2020. We wanted to bring some context to these numbers, so we documented every case of fraud dealing with public assistance in Minnesota. There are several one-offs worth millions, but here are the big ones. Feeding our future, the fraud case that keeps growing. The U.S. Attorney's Office says that sits around $300 million alone. Just last week, the feds announced the investigation into housing stabilization services. The unsealed search warrant identified about $9 million in fraud in that case, but that investigation is just getting started. Thompson has said he believes the majority of the entire $300 million program is fraud. So stay tuned.
It's an extraordinary problem, and the fraud that's pervasive in this state.
Finally, autism centers, something 5 Investigates just reported on last week. Federal search warrants accuse 2 centers of $20 million in fraud. But again, that's just what we know today. That number is also expected to grow. Our review shows the U.S. Attorney's Office has clawed back, or a judge has ordered defendants to pay back about $100 million in the last 5 years, including about $75 million in Feeding Our Future alone. Money recovered goes back to the victims. In this case, that's the federal government. But guys, you can see how quickly these investigations add up. Leah?
Certainly do. Ryan Raish tracking our dollars. Thank you.
You just heard all of that. This is how bad it is in Minnesota right now. Now, we're talking about $1 billion. I'm a redneck. I ain't seen that kind of money ever. I don't think I will ever see that kind of money, nor do I want to. That's just reaching into way too much tax money and silliness that happens when people just have too much going on in their life. Now, we need to start paying attention to these states. Now, you may be thinking, oh, well, that goes on in Democrat states. Yes, it also goes on in Republican states. That's the silliness of all this. People need to realize that there are certain states that this goes on in all the time. The thing is that it really goes on where you allow people to just ignore the laws. And that's what goes on in Minnesota. So, yes, we need to see what is going on there, and we need to pay attention to it because it's your tax dollars. Just thought I'd bring this to your attention. This has been Paul, the Redneck Thinker. Y'all have a good day now. Bye. So, folks, that's the story that I wanted to bring you on this video. And I just wanted to say thank you again for coming by. Hit like, subscribe, comment, all that fun stuff if you don't mind. Help me out. So, y'all have a good day now. Bye.